Well, greetings friends and welcome back. Finally, we are looking at No Man's Sky in VR. An exciting day for me. I've been looking forward to VR No Man's Sky for as long as since it's been announced. Now, if you're not familiar with my channel as yet, I've been doing a lot of Elite Dangerous videos, putting my head through things and into things and moving around in areas where you're not supposed to see and looking behind the scenes of ships. And that's what I aim to do now in No Man's Sky. If at some point during the video you like what you see, make sure you hit the subscribe button. One click for you makes a big difference for me. Let's get into it. Now I want to address the elephant in the room straight away, which is when you move around, this will happen. Unfortunately, kind of nothing I can do about it at the moment, and it doesn't give you a huge amount of play space to walk around in. So you can see that I'm walking around and pretty much it's not letting me be in any of these positions. And once you get yourself back into the center of the room, you're limited in terms of height as well. So that is a real shame already. The other point is that you kind of have a heads-up display, which is where it says they're powering the base. That doesn't move when you look around. So in actual fact, when you rotate yourself around using the stick, that's when the UI actually turns around with you. And that becomes a bit janky when you're on planet surfaces. Also, for some reason, I only have one hand. I don't know why that happened, but the other one kind of didn't load. So you'll just have to imagine that one for the time being. In terms of moving around, you use your trigger to move around, which is kind of weird because it just goes where you're pointing. So that means that if you want to move backwards, you kind of have to, point behind yourself and do ridiculous Macarena moves to move yourself around, which is a bit weird. The other thing is, with regards to interacting with ships and things, you basically enter a fishing minigame. It's just so bad. You hold onto it and then you yank the fish in to use the ship. I don't know why they did that. That's, who knows. In terms of the flight controls, it's a virtual HOTAS. Obviously you can't see my hand, but you can see another issue, which is how sensitive the stick is, which if you're prone to motion sickness, that's pretty much going to cane you. The throttle is okay. So if we just get out of here for a second, get into some hopefully better lighting to show you the ship. So we'll just fly away clearly through another ship. That was fun. And we'll just stop it there. So in terms of the cockpit, it is very large, and I'll try and trace it with my hands. This is a large trading ship. I think it's one of the largest ships you can actually get for trading. So, or beyond an S-class, I suppose. So in terms of the ship's size and scale, I'll give you the runaround with my hand as the guide, so you'll actually be able to see that in both VR and in the real world. So the strut opening the door comes up to about there, and the handle comes to there if I grip it. Now obviously you can't open it in deep space because we don't have EVA suits in No Man's Sky as yet. The side of the panel comes down here, and we're about to get that out of play space area warning, but I'll keep going. Here is the outside of the cockpit. The lower edge of the cockpit comes back this way. Here is the other grab handle, and here is the strut at the rear. In terms of the height, I definitely won't be able to touch the absolute top of it, but this top strut goes all the way along here, comes to around there and back around this way, and then back up towards the end again. There are some more grab handles here which we can't reach. And in terms of the seat, unlike Elite Dangerous, this is an extremely comfortable and oversized looking seat, kind of oversized like my hands are. They look like they're very large mitted gloves. So the seat is very padded. It's sort of fairly luxurious in nature. You can see a couple of grab handles there to get in and out, and I'm sure we'll get that warning again, but we can pop ourselves down and see through the cushion and the bits and bobs that make up the underside of the ship itself. Down here we have some nice cabling that's running through the outside of the ship, and a lot of the sort of similar sort of textures that we see in Elite Dangerous, like the hexagonal sort of tiles down there. A couple of switches and buttons and things that unfortunately we cannot interact with any sort of way, which is a bit of a shame, including big red buttons that you just want to push. The holographic display here is quite sort of small. It's about the size of a handball, I would say, and you can see that some of the elements kind of disappear as you start sticking your head through things. This panel over here is about the size of a Probably a Samsung Galaxy Tab A tablet, maybe a little bit bigger. Same with that one down there. And then we have this thing which displays some sort of stuff, but we can't really see what it is, and bits disappear before these large foot plates. Hopefully you can still see some of that stuff despite that ridiculous warning. As with all space games, scale is a difficult thing to explain, but if we find one of these asteroids that you can actually shoot holes through, there's one there, and we fly inside, you'll be able to get a good idea of how big these asteroids actually are, which they don't seem like they're that big, but you will see very shortly that you can hide your entire ship inside, and they go for probably, I don't know, that hole is probably 100 meters wide, so it's an extremely wide entry that I've just blown a hole in. Now, the biggest problem with the flight controls in this game is that, at least on the Vive, you need to actually hold your grip buttons. I'm being shot at. Hold your grip buttons to actually activate them, which, as you'll see in a second, if you're trying to shoot something, oh god, and activate the grip buttons and use the trackpad to select your weapons, it's very difficult indeed. Come here, pirate. The vision obviously is good, and being able to track them as they fly around, even though I'm doing a pretty bad job at it, it does give you a good sense of where their position is, and to be able to hunt them down in theory. But you do feel like you're sort of fighting the controls, which is a little bit unfortunate. Come here. So certainly nowhere near the accuracy of a true HOTAS, which is kind of both to be expected in a way, but also a bit of a shame. Now, the UI is weird. So these floating icons are actually floating here. You can see that I can put my hand behind them. Once you're actually looking at them, they disappear off into the distance, kind of to where you'd expect that they would be. So yeah, a little bit janky, kind of as with everything else. We just pulse our way down to the planet's surface. This is where you start getting some loading issues and some graphics issues and performance issues. You can probably see it trying to shake itself to death. Now, I'm running this on a GTX 1080 and an i7700K processor. It's not overclocked, but it's still pretty solid. And even with this setup, and I'm not super sampling it either, so even with this setup, it's pretty rubbish in terms of frame rate. Unfortunately, not much we can do about that one. The controls are very difficult. Most of them use different quadrants on the trackpad to actually do things, and it's hard to actually hit them with any degree of certainty or repeatability, which is a bit of a shame. So a lot of people have complained about the frame rate. I think especially on planets, it's a bit of an issue. It's playable as far as I'm concerned, but it's certainly not a super smooth experience. So it really depends on how prone to motion sickness you are. I'd say if you're very prone, steer clear for the time being, but if you can handle it a little bit, you know, you should be okay. I've got a bit of an iron gut when it comes to motion sickness, so I'm probably a reasonably good candidate to be testing this stuff, but also probably beware that I'm more resistant to it than you might be. In terms of the weapon, I haven't got my hand, but basically you just reach over your shoulder and you pick up your gun, and then it has sort of touchscreen menu where you select between the different types of things you want to fire. The one good thing about the ridiculous movement method is that you can sort of run around on the planet and go all gangster as you're moving in one direction and mining in another. So it probably makes your mining a little bit more efficient, that you don't have to always be just standing there shooting something for an hour and a half. As it gets into your mining laser, you can just sort of run around and point backwards or what have you. So I can literally just sort of do that and mine as I go over the hill. So that's kind of handy, probably handy in combat as well with the Sentinels. You know, you can be running in one direction, shooting in the other, and, you know, doing a John Wick impersonation. Speaking of drones, there he is. So he is about that big, I would say, in terms of length, and about that wide, about that high. So pretty high, pretty large flying machine in terms of the drone itself. Let's jump in some of these exocraft so I can show you the interiors of those. And again, see here the UI there. And again, if I turn around, it doesn't move. I have to actually do that for the UI to follow me. So you kind of have to end up facing the same direction, which is a bit rubbish. So if we put our gun away, lose our hand, and do our fishing game again, we can jump into this one. Now, this is where it gets even more nauseating. The way these work is simply holding the controller like this. You can do it with 1 or 2 hands. It doesn't really make any difference. Right trigger, accelerate, left trigger, reverse. But what you'll find is, well, you'll see there. Now that is pretty nauseating even for me. And because these controls are, you can do it one-handed by the way, because these controls are so touchy, if you hit a bump or then you're steering like this, then you will definitely be throwing up all over the place if you're not used to motion. So that one is a word of warning for anyone who's susceptible. In this exocraft, especially in that big thing, it's not too bad. Now, in terms of the interior and stuff, just have a look at the gun up there. You can see that it's following my head movement. And let's just stick our head through the back, even though it will give us the warning. So you can actually see that that turret is aiming in the direction that I'm looking, which is kind of cool. It does a pretty good job with a bit of inertia to sort of track where I'm going. And you can then sort of see the outsides of the exocraft, and there's a big hole in the bottom. In terms of this canopy, it's obviously much smaller. The top of it sort of runs along here, comes to the end there with the crossbeam, and down to the corners, and then back around this way. There are some large sort of fire extinguisher looking kind of things, and again, the warnings, and maybe feet rests up here, and some rudder controls down the bottom. But certainly looking like a small, kind of like one of the fighters in Elite Dangerous. So if we get out of this one and head into this one, do the ridiculous fishing game with this thing. There we are. Now this one is much more like a giant piece of farming machinery. So what this thing means is that if you are prone to a bit of motion sickness, this might be your exocraft of choice. It is obviously much slower. The weird thing about it though is, watch here, I'm turning and it doesn't actually turn until I press the trigger to accelerate and turn. So it's very unpredictable in terms of its controls, and yeah, again, it'll be pretty nauseating if you're not used to it and used to the motion. So the exocraft, I think, have been executed pretty badly. In terms of the scale of this thing, now let's go to the end. So if I reach, the corner is there, and the other corner is probably going to crash into something all the way over there. So it's a very big cockpit, the front of which sort of goes to the points of those controllers and comes down like this before the front dash. And again, displays and things and big red buttons that you really want to press that you can't actually press because it just won't let you, which is a real shame. And through the back of this thing, yeah, there is absolutely nothing, just a blue square. Right, out we go. And then it's put me in the wheel. Okay, so clearly the VR is not fully realized. The wheel here on the Colossus is taller than I am, so that gives you an idea of how large that exocraft actually is. And finally, if we summon this one is about halfway in terms of jankiness and vomitiness. Again, it won't turn unless you're actually accelerating. So if you're halfway through a thing and then you let go of the accelerator, you'll just go straight and then throw up as it turns abruptly to whatever direction you were holding before you actually stopped. So that one is one to be aware of. This one, I'll trace the outlines of this. So it comes from back here, down to the crossbeam there, and then down to the front here. So it's a much more closer sort of cabinet. I like the fabric wrapping on these pipes, which obviously get hot, which is why they're wrapped. Again, a big red button that you can't push, which is a bit of a shame. And kind of the old fire extinguisher kind of stuff and pedals down here, as you've seen in the previous exocraft. So unfortunately, not really that detailed as far as the interior goes. And the same seat without the armrests that you've seen before. If we stick our head through the rear, well, I mean, we see the turret again, which is again following me around. That thing that spins around on the edge, and then kind of a bit of a blank kind of interior. So I completely appreciate why they don't want you stepping outside of the areas that you're supposed to be in, because you'll see the issues. And here's another issue, which is, there we go, it wouldn't let me out there for a while. In terms of the structures and things inside, yeah, the scale is good. The scale is as you would expect. This bed is the correct scale for a probably king single bed. So it is slightly bigger than a standard small single bed. And, you know, everything else in VR kind of looks okay in terms of scale, maybe a little bit chunky, the opposite of Elite Dangerous. This is a bit sort of on the chunky side for everything. These menus do take some getting used to because you don't really have button configurations on things. You just have, I don't know, this weird thing. Yeah, you're gonna shoot me? Come on, bring it. Obviously aiming is really easy because you're just aiming a gun as if you would expectedly aiming a gun. So that's nice and easy. And the last thing I'll show you before I get out of here is that the ship doesn't actually have an interior until you jump in. And so again, just like Elite Dangerous, it is two different models that are loaded. So in conclusion, barring any major performance issues that you may or may not have with your particular hardware, it's certainly playable. It's not the dream that I hoped that it would be. Unfortunately, there are a few issues with it. If you start a new game, you do have two hands though, so that is just an issue for that particular save game. It's a bit of a shame that they don't let you stick your head through stuff and actually, you know, walk around in a room scale. So clearly this is designed for a seating position. And even there you could see as I was flying the ship, I was still in a standing position holding the HOTAS. So if you were sitting down, obviously that's more comfortable for flying, but then when you're on planet side, you're walking around, you're kind of sitting floating. So that's a bit weird. And the other thing you could see is that I loaded a very advanced save game where I had freighters and ships and all sorts of other stuff already under my belt. So in the next video, I'm going to look at what it's like to start a brand new game in VR and whether that's actually worth doing if you have a VR headset, or whether playing in Pancake version is still the best way to experience No Man's Sky even after this update. So until then, please make sure to subscribe, hit the button. It's literally that much of an effort for you and it makes a huge difference to this channel. And I'll see you in the next one. Fly safe.